Hi all, this is the third and final video in the series of inheritance modes. So let me begin by writing a table. So now we'll see quickly that let's say if I have three classes, C1, sorry, two classes, C1 and C2, and let's also say that I have main function. Okay. Now, if my class C1 contains three members, let's say first member is in private scope, and this is what I'm calling as integer A, and I'm writing second member, and the second member is in protected scope, and let me call it as integer B, and let me write the third member under public scope, which is integer C. So now my class has three members, one public, one protected, and one private. Now let's say if I'm importing and creating class C2, and sorry, if I'm inheriting class C1 and creating class C2, the way the imaginary content is going to be, or whatever that's going to be inherited is going to be, when I'm saying public, we can only inherit these two, protected and public. So these are something like inherited. So what was protected will be protected. If it's a public inheritance, what was public protected will be protected here as well. Int B. And what was public will be public here as well. Okay. So what was protected will be protected. What was public will be public. Okay. Now the last one, the main function. Inside the main function, if I want to create an object for C2, and I'm calling it as object C2. Okay. So now if you notice, outside the class or in main function, I can only access what is public. Okay. I cannot access private. I cannot access protected. So what is public? Only C is public. If you see A, it's not accessible. A, it's not accessible. B, only within here it's accessible. So somewhere here, if I do C out B, this is okay. Somewhere here, if I do C out C, this is acceptable. But here only C is acceptable because that's in public scope. So this is public inheritance. In public inheritance, protected and public members will be protected and public. Private members cannot be accessible. Now, let me extend this idea and write about protected inheritance. Class C1. Again, class C1 has a private int A, protected int B, and lastly, public integer type C. This is class C1. This is the base class. Now I'm writing class C2, and now I want to use protected inheritance, and I want to extend C1. Okay. Again, this is like imaginary. We don't write it, but the compiler will get it. So when it is protected, what was protected and what was public will be both protected. Okay. So imaginary, it's going to be protected. It's going to be protected. Okay. So, and now If I write main function, and if I create an object for C2, obj C2, now I cannot access anything because what was protected cannot be accessed outside the class. So this is what protected inheritance means. Anything that was protected and public will become protected. There's no point of discussing on what was private will be what. We cannot touch private entities. Now the last type of inheritance, private inheritance. And let me write class C1. And again, class C1 has three types of members. Come on. Private, integer A, protected integer B, and last public integer C. Okay, so these are three types of members. Now I'm writing class C2 and sorry, sometimes I write Java. Yeah, class C2 private C1. Now this is private mode of inheritance. In private mode, what was protected and public, both of them will be private. So this is going to be integer B. This is going to be integer C. And integer main. If you create an object for C2, private members, you cannot access outside the class. Private member, you cannot access like that. Only through A or through C1, I can access C. But through C2, I cannot access C because the scope is going to be private. Here also, through C1, if I create, I'll start from here. If I create an object C1, something like C1, object C1, I can access object C1 dot C. This is fine. Again, but here I cannot do anything with C2. But C1, object C1, I can do C1 dot C because C is always in public scope in C1. So that's why I can do that. So that's the thing. Thank you.